Dimitrios Kairidis, who's Greece's Minister for Migration and Asylum. Minister, good morning.
Good morning from Athens.
Let me deal with that point that Orla raised at the end of that conversation, the allegations of illegal pushbacks, which come from a number of reputable organisations. How do you respond to those allegations?
They are all being investigated under the proper authorities, including this New York Times story, under the order of the Prime Minister. And we are in dialogue with the European authorities as well in that regard. But some stories in the past were proven false, like the story of little Maria being constrained in the Evros river. We have to be very careful because the criminal networks of smugglers are very well organized. And they don't like the policy of guarding the borders and want to disseminate misinformation in that regard. Greece is a state of law, rule of law, and respects fully international treaties and obligations. And in that regard, I have to just say that we are saving hundreds of lives every day from sinking boats that are put in distress by the smugglers themselves, who cut with knives the inflammable boats. And the Greek Coast Guard intervenes to save the lives of passengers. And the same goes all over the perimeter of Greece.
I mentioned what the Supreme Court said this week, that it's investigating, quote, alarming phenomena of violence against immigrants and incitement to racist pogroms. You would condemn that, presumably, if it is happening?
Totally and absolutely.
And what would you do about it as a government if it is happening?
Anybody who takes the law in his own hands is breaking the law and will be facing the consequences provided by the law. Greece is a rule of law state, and everybody should know that.
Can I bring in another voice for you to hear and then respond to? Because I've been speaking to Lefteris Papagiannakis, who's a director of the Greek Council for Refugees. That's a non-governmental organisation in the fields of asylum and human rights. I asked him what he thinks is fueling the anti-migrant rhetoric.
Unfortunately, the discussion, it's very toxic. Migrants are presented as a danger. We did it during the pandemic. The migrants brought in the virus, which is not true. Now we see it with the fires. The fires were set by migrants. So it's a constant badgering of society with a toxic and hostile narrative.
I mean, one particular significant political figure has said that migrants were obstructing the work of firefighters and accused them of starting the blaze. You would dismiss that out of hand, would you?
Yes, it's easy to look for an enemy when you cannot justify the lack of capacity or the failure of the system to fight these tragedies.
We now have this legal development, don't we? The Supreme Court has ordered an investigation into what it terms an alarming phenomena of violence against immigrants and incitement to, quote, racist pogroms. Are you encouraged by that?
I'm always very encouraged when the legal system reacts quickly and swiftly. But this has been going on for a number of years, especially in the area of Evros. We know about militias and individuals hunting migrants for a number of years. Everyone knows it in the area. It is a good thing that the justice system decided to react. The videos that circulated in social media were very alarming, not to say very distressing. It is a disgrace to have people talking like this, and especially having people listening to them and encouraged by such narratives in order to get out and chase people. This is a disaster. And apparently, more and more people are convinced that this is the right way to go, to protect the borders, the country, the forest. It's a good thing that the justice system has been acting, but in order to change the public perception, we need a change in the narrative from the part of the government.
Let me come back to you, Minister, off the back of what you've just heard. Yes, an acknowledgement that the Supreme Court is now acting, but also the claim that this has been going on for a long time, and the suggestion is that the government's done next to nothing about it.
It's not true. This government is middle of the road, has a middle of the road approach between the extremes. And as you know, immigration easily becomes prey to the forces of extreme forces, political forces, both on the left and the far right. We want and we do always respect the law and international obligations, but we also protect the borders of Greece. And we don't believe that the protection of border violates human rights, as some extremists on the other side might say. Now, Evros is a border district next to Turkey. It is the district that shares the land border with Turkey. So issues that have to do with Turkey are very sensitive there, obviously. And we had the incident of Turkey using immigrants to break the border back in March of 2020. So we have to be very careful on this regard. Obviously, anything that breaks the law is illegal and should be punished, including the vigilantism of some extremists. And we say that out loud in every possible term.
Can I put to you what Amnesty International have said? They've reacted to the deaths specifically of the people in Evros, but they've looked at the broader picture. And they highlight, as they see it, the lack of access to safe and legal routes for some people on the move, and what they go on to say is the persistence of migration management policies predicated on racialized exclusion. Do you say that simply is not happening in Greece?
Listen, we have to strengthen legal paths to migration, and we are working on that regard.
And that's within the EU as well, presumably, you would say?
Obviously. And I'm talking with the Commissioner, Ylva Johansson, the Swedish Commissioner responsible for the matter, on a weekly basis in that regard. And we have to have humanitarian paths and everything. We have to fight irregular migration. Irregular migration is dangerous for human life because it puts these victims in boats that should never leave the coast of Libya, because it puts these victims in forests that are in fire and should never find themselves in such dangerous situation, because it puts these victim irregular migrants in flammable boats that can sink at any time and on a daily basis. And I'm sorry I have to stress that, but it's something that does not make it into the news. On a daily basis, Greek authorities save human lives in the Aegean, in the Mediterranean, up in Evros. So the idea to portray only, the racist, which obviously exists in some parts, as it exists in all over Europe, and I'm sure in the UK as well, gives not a very balanced, this is what I'm trying to say, not the full picture. The full picture is that we have a problem with irregular migration. We have a migration crisis brewing in the Sahel. We have problems with Turkey that is not cooperating as it should be, and it has signed. We are hopeful that now it has signed an agreement with the UK. It might be more willing to cooperate with the EU and with Greece to manage together this very serious problem in order to save lives and to avoid the situation where it is the smugglers, the criminal smugglers, deciding who comes into Europe and who doesn't. It should be the European societies deciding according to rules and regulations with safety, rather with the present situation that is totally unacceptable.
I'm very grateful to you for coming on, because it was important to hear your point of view in this complicated debate. Dimitrios Kairidis, Greece's Minister for Migration.